Hey guys, Drifter here. Welcome to the 2024 edition of my annual Halloween movie guide and recommendations. 2024 so far has been a fantastic year for horror films. 2023 was pretty good as well. It's been especially good for independent horror films getting full theatrical releases and performing kind of well. There were a lot of fantastic movies to review this year, so I'm going to start off by briefly talking about 6 honorable mentions, and then we're going to move into my 6 actual recommendations, and I'll probably double or triple the amount of time I spend speaking about each one of those. Of note, I haven't been able to go to theaters recently, so I haven't seen some films that I know are probably really good, like Alien Romulus, Terrifier 3, or The Substance. I just missed out on a few of those, but we're going to be talking about movies that I have seen this year. And good news for you, I'm going to be talking about movies that are mostly new and well known. I've got whole real movies with real multi-million-dollar budgets, almost all made in the 2020s to recommend. None of my standard obscure low-budget 80s stuff that I go for. This is stuff that's all going to be new and easy to find. I'm also going to have text on the screen below and links down there in the description where you can find these films streaming on digital as best of my ability. So without any further ado, let's jump into the honorable mentions with Longlegs. It's an overall fantastic and scary film, probably the best thing on the list today in terms of cinematography. It's got top-notch acting from the entire cast. They were all very believable. When they got scared, I really felt it. Some of the even crazy characters like Nicolas Cage, which was not revealed until the last half of the movie. Nicolas Cage stars in this movie and you don't even see him till the last half because he is Longlegs. He's frightening, he's menacing, he has face makeup. It's definitely a film that relies on atmosphere instead of jump scares. It's a very slow burn kind of horror film that's very moody and broody and just kind of makes you feel uncomfortable as it goes through. It's on the honorable mentions list because it was a little bit overhyped, not the scariest film of the year, and the ending, while good, left me feeling a little bit unsatisfied. The second honorable mention this year, which is still a good movie, is Late Night with the Devil. This was an extremely successful independent film and Shudder release. It actually killed it in theaters. However, I found this film to be lackluster upon my first viewing. It felt like kind of a VHS segment that went on for too long, and then I saw a Reddit thread pointing out all of the hidden subliminal messages throughout the film, and I felt like an absolute goober because I missed almost all of them. I think I only ever saw 2. And I always wanted to see a horror film where a ghost, the ghost, or a demon, a monster, something was hidden in almost every scene, off in the corner, a reflection, a shadow, or something. Just some cute little Easter egg in every single scene or frame. And I wondered why nobody ever made anything like this. Well, that's what Late Night with the Devil is. It has a ton of like hidden subliminal messages in it. And people probably don't make those because even eagle-eyed viewers like myself ultimately miss a lot of those little clues. So this film is actually much better if you look up some of the Easter eggs and spoilers first. David Dastmalchian does a great job acting. He carries the entire show. The beginning is a little bit slow. It's a lot of build-up, but then the last 30 minutes of the last act is really, really fun and satisfying. It's just the cinematography style is a little bit weird. It's going to swap back and forth between black and white and like 4:3 television. And I think that these subliminal messages were a little bit too well hidden, so not a lot of people are going to get them. Moving along, I also wanted to recommend in honorable mentions a movie called In a Violent Nature, which is basically Friday the 13th, but the camera only follows Jason over the shoulder. It's technically a different series, but it's just close enough to not get sued. So you get to watch the killer meticulously stalk and then murder a group of young campers. The stalking element of this film is interesting and well done. It's definitely the scariest part of the whole movie. Previously, you would only see the campers and then, the killer would come out and stick them, and that's the exciting part. A lot of this has to do with him stalking and waiting for just the right moment to move and strike. I felt that the kills overall were not as violent as promised. More specifically, we have about half of them being regular kills and about half of them being outrageously ultra-violent. So a little bit of inconsistency there. This is a movie where the sound design does a lot of heavy listening because since you're stalking people, you're going to listen to them almost as much as you end up watching them. It's a very clever movie. It's cleverly filmed. It's got an interesting message. It's got some gore, but it's on the honorable mentions list because a lot of the time a film is filled with just this. Moving along, in honorable mentions is I Saw the TV Glow. This movie was sort of misadvertised as a coming-of-age analog horror type adventure. It's also slightly misadvertised in general as a horror film. It's extremely well filmed, it's extremely well acted, and it is unfortunately about 2 hours long and doesn't have a lot of action or horror-related thrills. There just isn't a whole lot, at least initially, happening in this movie. It does, however, have one of the best developed trans allegories that I have ever seen in film, and that doesn't come together until about the last 5 minutes, which, by the way, is an absolute gut punch. The last 5 minutes of this film explained everything that I initially hated about it and made it a much better movie, but the message was so brutal and so hard-hitting, I genuinely felt sick to my stomach. So despite not caring for about 99% of the movie, the last 1% left a very lasting impression on me. It's very well filmed. It's just very, very slow, and I think a lot of people probably aren't going to get it. Finally, in honorable mentions, I'd like to recommend a movie called Underwater. This is a Kristen Stewart film where she shaves her head and tries her absolute best to escape being associated with the Twilight franchise. It's a PG-13 underwater horror survival adventure type movie. It doesn't get too bloody or too scary, but again, the ending is something that really stuck with me. The first 45 minutes of this movie are a very standard surviving an underwater disaster type adventure, secure the sub, get the air, save the people, which can be scary enough on its own. The next 30 minutes escalates and adds some spooky paranormal elements to the film, and then the last 10 to 15 minutes were an absolute shocker to me. It did not go the direction I thought it was going to go, and I don't want to spoil it because the ending is so cool, but the ending made everything else make so much more sense and so much neater looking back on it. I think it's worth watching just for that. Very fun movie. And it's PG-13, so kids can probably, older kids can probably watch this without getting too freaked out. So we blew through those honorable mentions at turbo speed. Now it's time for the real meat of this video where I talk about my top 6 scary movies of the year. And we're going to start off with a film called Possessor. Possessor was written and directed by Brandon Cronenberg, who some of you may know as David Cronenberg's son, and the apple doesn't fall far from the tree because this film has no shortage of body horror and gore. It is the story of an assassin that can possess other people's bodies. Her preferred method of murder is to take over the body of an unwilling victim or patsy and use that person to assassinate the real target. The person whose body has been possessed is always forced to commit suicide, thus wrapping up any loose ends. I think this movie is really cool because it kind of swaps back and forth between a slow-paced, deliberate stalking of a target, very tactical, very smart, very brilliant, and then absolutely outrageous hyperviolence when it comes time for the actual assassination. The movie is set in an alternate 2008 and uses very grounded technology as a means of possessing other people. It takes just the right tone to make the technology seem believable. And the main plot involves the boyfriend of a tech billionaire's daughter getting possessed, and then the possessor using him to get close enough to assassinate the billionaire himself. This is done to enrich people who are attempting to short the stock of the company. Unfortunately, the possessor has jumped through too many bodies and their psyche is starting to fracture, which means they inconsistently lose control of the host body. The host body is sometimes able to fight back, even able to access the memories of the possessor, and attempts to get revenge on her by ruining her real life. It's like, you're going to steal my body and ruin my life? Well, I'll steal your body and ruin your life. We'll do this tit for tat. Even knowing that, this movie has a lot of twists and turns that I did not expect, but are all extremely well written. There's a strong undertone of criticism of the abuse of power of tech billionaires. The victim, or target in this case, is not a person you're going to have a lot of sympathy for, and it doesn't skimp out on the violence at all. When this movie pops off, it pops off very hard. So if you're the kind of person that watches horror movies because you want to see something violent or shocking, you're going to get plenty of that with Possessor. I will add 2 trigger warnings to this film that I think are important. Number 1 is that the possessor has swapped bodies so many times that they start losing sense of their own gender identity and start to hallucinate that they have more or less parts than they actually do. Some people are a little sensitive to that. And even though this is a spoiler for a part of the film that you can skip, it's an important warning. This movie does contain violence against children. Just thought you should know about that. Moving along, I wanted to recommend something a little bit more lighthearted with Abigail. Abigail is actually best if you go in completely blind, knowing absolutely nothing about the movie, which is almost impossible these days because the trailer spoils the twist, and so does the movie poster, and so does the literal logo of the movie. It's best if you go in blind, but it's still a fantastic movie even if you know the twist, which I'm about to spoil because that's the only point in talking about the movie. So the plot of Abigail is a group of mercenaries are hired to kidnap the daughter of a Russian oligarch billionaire and hold her up in a safe house overnight, waiting to drop the girl off with a buyer in the morning that intends to ransom her. As it turns out, the little 12-year-old girl is not a normal girl, but is instead a malevolent vampire. And I don't mean a boring vampire like from the Universal Monster series Bela Lugosi. I mean more like a Vampire Hunter D vampire. I mean a vampire with super strength, super speed, extremely intelligent, and a variety of weird magical powers that set the mercenaries down a path toward destruction. So she was actually the one that hired the mercs to kidnap her just so that she could have some fun people to toy with. Even knowing the spoilers, this spoils probably about the first 45 minutes of the movie, even after this, there's still about 3 more twists and turns and unexpected plot developments in the movie that make it really good. I will admit the first 45 minutes of this movie is a little bit on the slow or boring side. It's kind of, you get to meet the cast and crew and mercenaries and their skills and specialties and all that. And then the last 45 minutes is all out violence, a comical amount of blood spray. Think like blood fountains. Even though it's an R-rated film and a horror film, I wouldn't say that it's a hard R in that it tries to make you feel bad or be grim or depressing. It actually kind of toes the line with being a horror comedy, because again, it's not mean-spirited or awful or even particularly scary. It just feels like a wild and comedic splatter comedy to me to watch these awful mercenaries get chewed up by a 12-year-old little girl. I also just generally like movies where bad people get pitted up against something so much worse. And the overall vibe here is something very similar to From Dusk Till Dawn. You start trying to find good attributes in otherwise awful people to cheer them on so that they survive the slaughter of this little 12-year-old ballerina. Very, very fun movie. The next one, though, probably a better movie, a little bit less fun, and that's When Evil Lurks. When Evil Lurks is a Spanish-language Argentinian film by the director of the movie Terrified. It could be seen as a very loose sequel to Terrified, or perhaps an in-universe movie that builds on that mythos. And I want to clarify, not Terrifier. Terrifier is a different series. Terrified is what we're talking about here today. And I do want to warn you that this is an extremely offensive film, even by my standards. It's extraordinarily violent, and it genuinely conveys a sense of evil more than any film I've seen all year or in the last several years. And it contains, this is slight spoilers, horrible violence against children, pets, and the mentally handicapped and the elderly. Nobody is spared in this movie. So I'm serious when I say it's a big boy movie. That doesn't mean it's bad, though. It's actually a fantastic horror film and a pretty good film in general. Definitely the scariest movie on this entire list. The basic plot of When Evil Lurks is that demon possession is real, but instead of it being a Catholic or magical or religious thing, it has its own sort of science and logic to it. 2 brothers who are just poor farmers discover a demon-possessed man and know that by the logic of their world, which is explained through some lore building, that the possession will spread if this man dies before he can be exorcised by an official exorcist. His death would spread the possession to probably everybody in the county, if not the entire state. These things are extremely dangerous. So they take the body, drive 2 hours away, try to dump it in a ditch, and hope it just becomes somebody else's problem, that the possessed body will pass somewhere else and it'll just be some other village's problem. Unsurprisingly, they screw this up, and the possession or demon infection spreads to both their rural community and through several nearby cities. The demons in this is a little bit more of a generic word. They're never super explained, but they do feed on your fear and hatred and negative emotions, which they work very hard to spread through acts of violence or manipulation. The demons are incredibly intelligent and are the most menacing foes I've seen in horror in a long time. The exorcist can only exorcise them because they're sort of able to forgive the demons or not feel the hatred, not feel the horror, and sort of suppress their own emotions. And these are creatures that will take you over. There won't be like a spooky possession scene. It'll just get you, immediately assume control of your body, and it'll sit there and pretend to be perfectly normal for days until just the right moment. These things will snap and just go into hyper violence, or they'll just sit there and be manipulative and try to turn you against each other. Their goal is pure evil, and of note, killing them seems to only cause them to multiply, and it's especially bad if you shoot them with a gun. It causes them to multiply 10 or maybe even 100-fold. So they can jump into most people, but not those with strong wills, and they can spread through animals, and even they can possess objects that you pick up and touch and spread through objects. This is a very scary movie that explores the true nature of evil and of human failure despite your best efforts. I think it's the scariest movie I've seen all year, and I want to clarify that this is a hard watch for most people. But if you want to see how an actual demon and how an actual being committed to nothing but malevolence would behave, you can watch When Evil Lurks. Just be prepared. Next to last on this list is a movie that came out last year called Suitable Flesh. Suitable Flesh is a Lovecraftian horror film based on the short story The Thing on the Doorstep. And fun fact, it's produced and co-stars Barbara Crampton, who you may know from her roles in 80s horror movies such as The Reanimator, The Beyond, Chopping Mall, and even Puppet Master. Suitable Flesh is about an entity, or demon if you want to call it that much like our previous film, can take over people's minds. Or more accurately, what this one does is forcibly swap your body with whatever body it currently occupies, so it can Freaky Friday you without your consent. This entity is extremely old, extremely nihilistic, generally malicious, but written in a way to where it's also kind of human. Imagine a fallen angel or maybe a shaman with magic powers that's been hopping bodies for so long they've lost all sense of morality, they've lost all sense of self, and they're just kind of screwing around just for the sake of doing it because their life has no purpose anymore. There is, despite a lot of evil in the villain in this, a fair amount of humanity in them too, of a being that is suffering. Its primary motivation is to find a suitable host body that it can live in for a long time, because most people it'll reject after a couple of months or years. So it is literally looking for suitable flesh. Enter, the main character is a psychiatrist that gets accidentally pulled into this world of body-swapping madness when this entity discovers that she is perfectly compatible with him. And uniquely, the body-stealing demon has been exclusively stealing male bodies for at least the last several hundred years, and is intrigued by being in a female body for the first time. You'd think this would be a movie about gender roles and feminism and, women's issues, but for the most part, it's not. It's just like a wild, sex-driven, kind of violent romp through some craziness and being forced in and out of your body. The cinematography on Suitable Flesh is interesting because it is deliberately filmed in a way to make it look a little bit like a 90s sitcom. We have soft lights, soft lenses. A lot of times when you look out the windows of buildings, instead of there being an actual exterior, there'll just be a color or shade like they would do on a cheap set. But it looks a little higher budget than that, kind of like The Love Witch. This looks like a 90s sitcom, and it seems somewhat out of era and very dreamy, which makes the violence all the more off-putting when it does happen. I will say that this particular movie doesn't have that much violence. There's enough there to satisfy horror fans, and some of it's really clever, like the backup cam. There's a scene where one character runs over another one with the car and smushes the other character against the wall, and all you see is the backup cam just coming into their horrified face, and then it slams. And they do it 4 more times. It's such a great effect. They don't really zoom in on it. It's kind of small. You're like, oh my God, she's crushing them, which is kind of a fear that you would have. For those of you that have backup cams and have used them, it's actually something that really hit home for me. So the first half of Suitable Flesh is a build-up, and the second half is total body-swapping madness. The film is well acted and pretty decent based on its technical merits, but I put it on this list because it's a concept that really stuck with me for a while. I think I've had maybe 2 or 3 dreams about this movie and what it would be like to be forced out of my body and have to swap into a different one. This is one that'll get inside your head and stay there for months to come. Last on the list, and well, maybe next to last. We have one more honorable mention I'll get to quickly, but the last big movie on the list is The Autopsy of Jane Doe. This is one of a very few on this year's list that wasn't filmed in the 2020s. I think it was a 2015-2016 film, and it's a horror film by the director of Troll Hunter and Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. This movie is kind of a slowly boiling supernatural thriller that spills out into chaos in the final act. It's clearly a low-budget movie. It's set mostly in a single location with a very limited cast, but it doesn't feel low-budget. It actually feels really well-made and professional. It feels really crisp, clean, well shot, well acted, good audio, good pretty much everything that you want on technical merits. And the base plot of The Autopsy of Jane Doe is that there is a small-town sheriff who discovers an unidentified body in a house where it seems that the residents all killed each other. They were able to identify all the other residents, just not this body. So the body is sent to the morgue for an autopsy by a father and son duo. The father has been training his son to take over the funeral home family business after he passes or retires. As they begin this meticulous autopsy, the body itself begins to reveal many unusual mysteries. The wounds that Jane Doe has don't seem to make much sense, and as they explore, her condition becomes increasingly bizarre. As they continue through the autopsy, scary things begin to happen in the morgue and ramp up the deeper they go into her, up until a point where they are trapped by a storm. The son begins to believe that while dead, Jane Doe may still be conscious in some capacity and does not want her body examined. I don't want to spoil it too much, but this is a very creepy film and it's very well written. The mystery of Jane Doe and what happened to her slowly unfolds over the hour-and-a-half runtime, and there's a lot of very realistic and believable autopsy procedures. The film contains a pretty outrageous amount of nudity, but it's only one dead body, one actress laying there on the table as a body. And again, a fair amount of gore, but only from the autopsy scenes itself. Very little other gore, kind of crazy things going on. It's impressive to me that they made a literal dead body into a menacing villain for the film, and it works. It's very fun. It's a very good movie. I would highly recommend it. And I do have one more at the end. We've got one more little honorable mention. Maybe I'll talk about this a little bit, but it's a movie I was almost not going to add. I just saw it a few days ago. It was called Hostile Dimension. I promised you that I wouldn't be recommending super cheap independent films, but this one is a notable exception. It is absolutely 100% a micro-budget independent film that looks like something out of the analog horror videos that you would see on YouTube. And to be quite honest, that works in its favor and makes it surprisingly believable. Hostile Dimensions is about a documentarian that discovers a magic door that opens to other random parts of the multiverse. Some of these dimensions are banal or friendly, and quite a number of them are, as the title would suggest, hostile. There are several very creepy scenes of getting chased by a tentacle panda, an evil god, even sky whales and pyramids, and all sorts of bizarre sort of analog horror looking monsters coming out of this thing. The first half of the movie is about the documentary team exploring the history of the door and kind of experimenting with it to learn how it works. I think this part of the movie works really well because it's very much so in line with that YouTube-style creepypasta filmmaking. It reminds me a lot of a Backrooms video or perhaps like a short horror film you would see on YouTube. The second half of this movie is a crazy multiverse-hopping journey through infinity to try to fix a problem that I don't really want to spoil because that's really where the plot is in the film. And I feel that the first half of this movie probably works best because the actions of the characters are fairly believable and it feels so much like one of those found footage horror films that you see on YouTube made for no money but slightly higher quality, like it totally works. And then the second half of the movie, which has an actual plot and a resolution and things going on, I didn't feel is quite as strong because it's really only there to make it as an excuse to make a lot of crazy things happen, where I found the creepier part of the movie to be the first part. Even though Hostile Dimensions is very low budget, and I want to clarify with you on this is a very low budget film, the effects are good and simple enough to get the job done if you're not trying to overanalyze it. They've just got a magic door. All they really got to do is magic door related shenanigans. And if you sit there and freeze frame it, you can probably pick out the effects, but they're pretty good for a super low budget film. I found this movie to be surprisingly good, surprisingly fun. It lives rent-free in my head, and I put it on here just to support independent filmmakers, which is honestly probably like 90% of what's on this list. And those are my Halloween movies for this year. I did a ton of them this year, but turbo fast. You've got a lot to choose from. I hope you find something perfect for your spooky season. Drifter out.